Yes, good morning. My name is Martin Lamers. I'm the retired fire chief from the city of Stoughton. I spent 42 years as a volunteer firefighter for Stoughton, and I actually was the first full-time chief for the city of Stoughton. I've been asked to come here today and talk about some of the major fires in the history of Stoughton. So I have a list of everything I have, so I'll be reading off some of these, and I'll take it from there. So as you know, Stoughton was formed back in 1847. Some of the official records of fires are pretty vague up until like 1877 or so. So you probably will miss some things, but we've got most of the major stuff listed here. For the most part, fighting fires back in the early days of the city of Stoughton was more like just with bucket brigade, or maybe there was a hand pump and a hose cart. So there was no real official fire department. Just as a reference, the first actual steam engine that was created and used in the United States was back in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1850. The first steam fire engine that was used in Stoughton was in 1883. So that's roughly 30-some years. So there's a little reference there. So Stoughton's first official fire department was created in about 1883, and that actually was created because of a catastrophic fire at the Mant Wagon Works. Most of the Mant Wagon Works was totally destroyed by that fire, and it put 225 men out of work. So you can imagine the economic impact that had on the city of Stoughton. So it was quite a big thing. One thing, if you kind of pay attention as we go through this, the Mant Wagon Works, as you know, was down by the river off of 4th Street. There was numerous fires at that same location, not necessarily the same company, but a different company over the years. So you kind of pay attention to that. I'll make note of those. The second major fire that occurred in Stoughton was in 1885. And there was, on the east side of Stoughton, there was a numerous amount of tobacco warehouses, because that was a big industry in the area. 10 of the 13 tobacco warehouses, as well as some of the train cars that were parked there, and even the actual train depot was destroyed by fire. Some of the estimates were that the dollar amount of that fire was $500,000. So back in those days, that was a lot of money. Then in 1889, several of the downtown buildings were destroyed by fire. You could imagine back in those days, all of the buildings were made of wood, and when a fire got started in one of them, it usually spread to others. So after that fire, most of those buildings were replaced with brick buildings, and many of those buildings are still standing today. Moving on, the second fire in the area of the Mant Wagon Works was in 1898, and that was the Stoughton Wagon Works. And that was a major fire that's, again, destroyed a major part of that facility. Then again, in 1919, there was another fire at that same location that destroyed the wood shop of that company. Moving on, the fourth fire at that location was in 1921, and that was at that time known as the Stoughton Wagon Works, and that destroyed another big part of that, and it was considered one of the most disastrous fires that ever occurred in the city of Stoughton. In 1925, the Martin Luther Orphans Home was destroyed by fire. In 1930, the First Catholic Church burnt, and that actually led to the new St. Anne's Church, which was then on Jackson Street and now is in that same area. In 1944, the First Lutheran Church was destroyed by fire, and the cause of that fire is believed to be wiring in nature. Many of the members of the fire department were members of the church, so that was a big deal for them. The new building for the church was actually built on its current site. In 1946, there was a tobacco sorting building which was on the corner of Academy and East South Street, and that was destroyed by fire. And that is actually the location of the Stoughton Trailers offices. In 1947, There was a fire at the Stoughton cabin body, another one at the same location as Mant, and that was in the boiler room of the cabin body building. And that, again, did a great amount of damage to that facility. In 1952, there was a fire at the Mobil Oil bulk plant, which was on East South Street. And that's East South Street in the railroad track. There was a big potential there for it actually causing damage to a lot of the residential properties in the area. And that was a major concern. And as it turns out, that facility was actually my father's place of employment. I was about 8 months old at the time of that fire, and we actually lived 2 blocks away from that. Getting to a little bit more modern times, most people will remember in 1966, in the early evening, a fire was called in for the basement of the Schultz Brothers store on Main Street. That building was destroyed, as well as the buildings on either side of it, and it was a huge economic impact to Stoughton. Efforts were made to try to access the basement, and because of the construction of the building and the difficulty getting in, the fire department was unable to actually access the basement to work on the fire. That fire, they brought in fire departments from Madison and Sun Prairie, Oregon, Edgerton, and McFarland, and Blooming Grove. These departments all assisted throughout the evening, and that fire pretty much burned all night long. That actual fire prompted the city of Stoughton to obtain its snorkel truck, which they'd had for many years. And 8 months later, the city had another fire, and this one at the area of the Matt Wagon Works, and that was actually a building that was owned at the time by what is now known as Stoughton Trailer. And that building totally burnt, and there actually was a fatality of that, and that was a young lad by the name of Keith Fuller, who was about 20 years old at the time, and he lost his life in that fire. I actually was a freshman in high school at the time of that fire, and the high school at that time was located where the school administration buildings are at the current time. And the smoke was so thick and stuff from that, actually wouldn't let the kids go out during the day, so we actually had to stay inside throughout the whole day because of the smoke. In 1996, there was another fire in the downtown area, and that actually destroyed the buildings that were Quam Electric and Stoughton Cycle and Shear Technique. That was the area that is now known as the Kegonsa Plaza. And that brings us up to more modern times. In 2005, the Christ Lutheran Church and School were destroyed. That fire was reported just about at about 1 a.m. in the morning, and when we arrived, the flames were visible through the roof. We called in additional fire departments, and we fought that fire throughout the night. We had about 11 other departments that came to help fight that fire. As it turns out, we put over 1 million gallons of water on that fire throughout the night, and I don't know, as some people may know, the school and the church were totally destroyed, and actually the church building that was next to it was destroyed. The total loss for that fire was determined to be somewhere in the area of $5 million. So the investigation of that fire led to the determination that it was actually arson, and the individuals responsible were eventually apprehended. And moving on from that, that was on the 17th of August, and the next day, as we were planning to start cleaning up from the church fire, that's the day that Stoughton was hit by the tornado. So that began another episode in the life of the Stoughton firefighters. The massive F3 tornado came through just north of Stoughton, and it traveled along about 17 miles on the ground, and it did a devastating amount of damage to the neighborhoods just north of the city. We had 53 fire agencies that came to assist the department over those years, over that time, and they aided in the aftermath. It took several months and years of actual efforts to clean up after that tornado. Just a little bit of history of the Stoughton Fire Department. The original Stoughton Fire Station was actually built right across the street from what is now the Opera House. And the City Hall at the time was the location of the second fire station. So the City Hall area, when they built the City Hall in 1918 or 19, excuse me, City Hall was built in the 1890s, and the fire department was included in that project. So the actual fire department was located in that building for about 60 years. After that, the fire station was an addition to the back of the City Hall with the 4 bays. At that time, it was quite a huge addition for a fire department, and the department was in that building for about 40 years. The current fire station is where it is today on the location, and it was built in 2008. So currently, the fire department is responding to over nearly 400 calls a year. And back in the early days, if they had 20 calls a year, that was a big deal for them. So there's been a huge change in the response to fire departments, and it's a big thing. Being a member of the volunteer fire department is a very rewarding, and it's a great thing. So if anyone would be interested in becoming a member of the fire department, you could go on the city website and look up an application for the department, or you could even contact the department and talk to them about becoming a member. So if you have the liking to do that, please do. They're always looking for new, energetic people. So that kind of wraps up my history of fires in Stoughton. Being a member of the department was a great honor and very rewarding for me, and I really enjoyed my years on the department. So thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Sharon Mason-Boersma. I'm a retired community social worker, and I'm also currently a community volunteer for the city of Stoughton. I'd like to talk to you today about my intervention and my acquaintances with the Albanian population who came to our city of Stoughton to live in 1999. In that year, in 1999, I was working for the Dane County Department of Social Services, joining forces for families, working at the Veterans Road Stoughton office that was open at that time. And I was working with a lot of community resources, including the Dane County City of Madison Public Health Department. I learned from a public health nurse that there were 133 Albanians coming to Stoughton to live here in our city. The Kosovo-Serbian War was happening at that time, and they were trying to escape danger and conflict from their home country, Kosovo. Most of them were from the capital in Ferazaj. Pristina is the capital, close to Ferazaj, and they were trying to find a safe way out. What happened were 2 relatives, 2 business people in Stoughton who owned a local business and lived in this area, had consulted with the state of Wisconsin legislators and our mayor to see if permission could be granted for approval for their relatives to come to Stoughton to live. The approval was granted in 1999, and they were coming in that summer. Employed as a community social worker, I was able to work and had the privilege of helping them settle and transition into their new home environment of Stoughton. Again, there were 133 people, both young, both old, some single, some families, and they settled mostly here in Stoughton after they arrived from some of them from New Jersey, where they had to make arrangements for documents there to enter Wisconsin. They settled in apartment buildings, and they also settled in some homes, many people living together and trying to learn American culture. Many could not speak English, but some, especially children, had learned the English language in the schools in Kosovo before the war. The children and the young people were more adept at knowing the English language compared to many of their parents and grandparents that came. I remember using my fingers and having them look at my facial expressions in order to communicate with them at the beginning of our time together. It was sort of funny at the time, but we got along great. Because they were categorized with refugee status, they were able to be provided financial assistance through benefits from the state of Wisconsin. We were also able to help them receive government financial assistance for health care and food share. One of the challenges we encountered daily was securing information from them for completing government forms for this assistance and for other documents. Much of the information and documentation was left behind in Kosovo during the Kosovo-Serbian War. They were not accustomed to using forms or applications. They did not do this in Kosovo. So when they came to the United States, this was quite challenging. And again, we had to show why we needed the documentation for them to get some services and assistance and to process this information. I was able to work daily with them and consistently with other agencies that we connected them with to transition, such as getting them enrolled in the Stoughton Public Schools, the nurses who helped with medical care from the Public Health Department, and our local medical resources here in Stoughton. Local area churches wanted to help. Housing resources through Dane County also were a great guide for services. We needed to get transportation services for them. Employment agencies also were able to help with some employment needs. The one-time United Refugee Service out of the city of Madison was a big help to help them with local resources. And of course, our local citizens from this community, I cannot say enough to thank them, who volunteered to help with so many areas of need. I recall having them all go to Madison, to the Social Security office, to get their Social Security card. And then it was onward to mainly 4 local employers that would hire them without previous letters of recommendation or a resume, as we know at this time. It was a matter of trust and hoping they would be diligent workers, would learn our English language, and transition as seamlessly as possible. Locally, driver's training and later driver's licenses were obtained so that the adults could gain the skill and training needed to get to and from those jobs that some held in Madison and some held in Stoughton. Immigration Services, the INS, and Lutheran Social Services were agencies that also really assisted in the legality for consultation and transitional services. Some spouses did stay behind in Kosovo due to the restraints of the war. We legally processed the paperwork necessary for them to come to Stoughton to join their wives and children 1 to 2 years later. That was a challenge. The one highlight I really remember that broke the ice was fishing. This was an important social outing and recreational activity, not just for the Americans, but for the Kosovars. We did some fishing in the summertime during that time. A local family from Stoughton invited all the Albanians, 133, to come to fish at their home from a pond that they had outside and welcomed them with open arms. It was the best connection. They also encouraged them to make some of their wonderful Albanian food that we really enjoyed. I recall the welcoming family from Stoughton also gave some of the seniors from Kosovo a high school graduation party or 2. One was held at a banquet hall, and the other was held at a local church. How much fun. About 1 year later, or about the year 2000, I was able to feel fairly comfortable about seeing them stabilize and transition to Stoughton. At present, to my knowledge, there is only one family out of all of the Albanians that came, that has moved away out of state and started their own business down south. Spouses selected from those who came here in 1999 have legally come here later to live. Families have increased in numbers, and currently there are almost, if not maybe, over 200 to 250 Albanians who currently live in Stoughton at this time. I learned so much from their culture, and I'm still learning from their culture, and also have the most respect for what they've done today. Stoughton remains a safe harbor to them after a very difficult, dangerous environment in Kosovo that led them there. Do they still see their families in Kosovo? Yes, they do. They try to make the trip every few years. It's expensive, but they talk to them routinely. They also really respect their culture, and they do not want to disconnect from the love that they have for their families there. I will never forget how Stoughton welcomed them to our town, and all of those people I got to know so well. What a privilege to have this opportunity and respect to make this a positive, safe place for them to live. Thank you, Stoughton.